Mm.
Right, so we are going live. It is. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're watching on the live stream, if you're listening back on the podcast, it's great to have you listening as well. I'm feeling a little bit more invigorated than I was last time we did the podcast as the week's going on. And this week, or even today, because I'm doing 3 a week, today I'm joined by Jon Jacob, who is a fantastic content producer and also commentator in the world of classical music. Probably an interesting way of defining you, which I'm sure you have a better way of describing yourself. So, John, how would you describe yourself in a short nutshell? Easy questions.
I that's a terrifying question. I I suppose I'm okay with content producer, and I suppose I know stuff about classical music. Um, a sort of podcaster, videographer. I do a bit of writing. I also notice I'm doing a lot of video calls, obviously now because of work. I also notice that during a video call, I can't actually look in the camera because it feels really weird to do that. That's pretty much me. That's what I do, and I do it all day long, and I love it.
I've been really enjoying the fact you can now use digital backgrounds on Zoom and have ridiculous
Yeah,
settings. I'm trying to come up with the
yeah.
most outrageous one possible.
I have a contact of mine who works in PR, and I'm just going to switch that off. Who works in PR? Who on the first day of discovering that you could set different backgrounds, clearly spent way too much time not only changing backgrounds but getting dressed up as well.
Oh,
And but I wasn't very comfortable with that because I just thought I'm not sure that's good value for money, really. But there we are. Who am I to judge, really?
exactly. How are you keeping with everything that's going on at the moment? Because I know it's quite a turbulent time, and I've struggled with momentum and drive and things over the last couple of weeks. It's gone very sort of from one end of the spectrum, trying to be as productive as possible, to wanting to crawl into a ball in the corner. How have you been doing with everything that's gone and life in general?
I have. I found. I feel as though I had a heads up because of the organisation that I sort of work for. In that, I think the private sector was probably a lot more organised than the government was, or at least a lot more organised than the government was giving the impression of. And so I sort of had a week's. I knew about this stuff a week in advance, or it felt like that anyway. So we were already sort of rehearsing working from home and testing systems the week before the lockdown began. I can't actually remember when that was. That's one of the weird things at this period of time. I have completely lost track of
Mm.
time. Um, but I know that once the email had gone around the organisation to say we're definitely going to do this is no longer a test, we're definitely going to do working from home, then it felt a little bit like, oh, it started then, and it became really first video conference calls with colleagues were highly emotional things, I found, because it felt like I finally came to appreciate just how far away they were and how close emotionally I felt to them, even though the week before I kind of thought, oh, I don't really care about you. Do you see what I mean? It was a very, that first week was sort of quite emotionally demanding. Um, and once the Prime Minister had made the announcement about everything sort of properly shutting down after those pictures of people in Richmond Park being complete idiots, uh, once that announcement had been made, that following week was ridiculously busy. It felt like there were loads of ideas, there were loads of people firing things at the internet, endless musicians streaming from the front room, which is odd, but also um, and I found that first full proper week really really exhausting. Sort of accustomed the following week, and then this week some colleagues have been furloughed, and that announcement about furloughing was actually quite rocky. That triggered quite a it triggered quite an emotional response in me, and I found it quite draining. I have had endless conversations with people from first thing in the morning to last thing in the afternoon, and each conversation is requires a certain amount of emotional investment. I'm probably more engaged in conversations now than I was when I was sitting in meeting rooms, and so I just find it all really tiring.
Yeah, it's one thing I've been completely amazed at is just how, as you say, tiring and draining it.
And yeah, I am the same. Um, I know that I will become accustomed to it. I also noticed that I look to the classical music world for a glimmer of hope, because I feel as though the classical music world will eventually, when we sort of reach a certain point and we turn a corner, the classical music world will offer some green shoots. So Andrew Mellor, who writes for classical music, I think he's out in Denmark. And I saw a tweet from him yesterday saying, "Oh, green shoots in Denmark, green shoots in Denmark. This, that, and the other has happened, and they're planning on opening in." And I don't know when. I'm afraid I can't tell you that. But little things like that make me go, "Oh, oh, it's going to be all right. It will be okay." And I like to feel quite so. I didn't expect to feel quite so emotionally connected to concert venues and to arts organisations. I think that probably surprised me.
Very true. Well, I was actually going to press you on your thoughts on how we're all doing in the online world as a sector later on. Um, One thing that we touched on earlier about you being a content producer and you run something called Thoroughly Good. And I realised I haven't asked you how you would define Thoroughly Good and what Thoroughly Good is, but also the story behind it and why you decided to create it.
Um, well, what do you want first, David Taylor?
We'll go for the what.
Yeah, need a priority. What is on the
Yeah,
list of priorities?
exactly.
Well, it started as a web design thing. Um, when I worked at the FT, I was a no, I wasn't a coder, but I was learning about Perl script, and I was doing IT support. And I'm terribly sorry somebody's messaged me. That's why I've looked down in the corner of the screen. Um, I was doing IT support, and I was supporting email servers and firewalls and routers and things like that. And I was bored. I was really bored because last like,
I'm really
well, if
surprised by that. It sounds like it could be something really riveting.
it was just like, well, if there's nothing wrong with the system, then there's nothing that I need to do. Why am I sat here? I don't understand why I'm just sat here doing nothing. Can I really be paid to be sat here doing nothing? And so I ended up learning about Perl script, and I think, and this was at a point in time when a file delivery system. Me and my boss worked on a file delivery system for data. Um, and at the time, people were going, "Why on earth would anybody want this? Why on earth would anybody want to download data files about the stock exchanges in return for a credit card?" In return for a credit card boom, lastminute.com really led that boom, and everybody had a side hustle. That's how it seemed. And so I thought, well, I'm interested in design. I'm interested in website design, so I'll do that. And I had to come up with an idea for the company. And the idea that I had for the name really reflected someone that I had worked the exchanges that I used to have with someone who I worked with in Aldborough at the concert hall. A lovely lady called Helen, who would put on a very plummy voice whenever she and I were stressed. We booked musicians for concerts and we booked accommodation, and it was quite stressful and extremely underpaid. And we would support one another by going, "Oh, don't worry, you're thoroughly good." And it was very unfortunately, when I tell the story, it doesn't sound very funny, but at the time it was a real release, and Helen really helped me. So when it came to coming up with an idea for what would you call this web design company, I thought, well, actually, thoroughly good had it. And the more and more I thought about it, the more it seemed to sort of suit my personality, and that struck me as being really important. The web design company faltered after a while because I realised that I liked establishing projects, but I was at that point in time it was quite difficult completing them, and so really when I ended up doing some radio production work, some radio production training, and then some work, I started making podcasts and writing a blog, and it just felt like, well, that's just a nice way of describing the stuff I make, really, because the name just stuck.
Yeah, and
No, I don't. know how I would describe it now. I just think I know it's podcasts and I know it's a blog. I think I'm probably easier. I find it easier to describe the kind of content which it is, which is it's always got to be honest and sincere. And um, if you're feeling a bit dark, if there's something that you're struggling with, then I do think that you have a personal responsibility to yourself to say that in such a way that it doesn't sound needy, but just includes other people. So I suppose it's about authenticity and sincerity, really.
Would you say it's sort of an arts media company, for want of a all encapsulating umbrella type thing?
Is that how it comes across?
No, I'm trying to think of other potential umbrella terms that are probably a bit cheesy, for want of a better phrase, but it's with the podcasting and also video content, which you do a lot of as well, and obviously the podcast. It is a whole different plethora of things you're offering that is a mixture of interviewing people, honest
Are you
commentary.
suggesting that I'm spreading myself too thin? Is that what you're
No,
saying?
I'm the exact opposite, where you're doing yourself a disservice by saying it's one or two things.
I think it's.
I'm saving it.
I think. I think I'm more comfortable describing it as marketing. I think it's basically marketing. I get quite worked up about bad marketing. I know it's not PR because I can't. I like PRs. Obviously, I like PRs, but I couldn't do PR really. But I can do marketing, and I can do the content that supports marketing. So I suppose really where I sit is within marketing. But that content production, 2005, everybody had a blog, everybody was writing something. Quite a lot of it wasn't very good, including my own. But that there was a whole I think there was a whole generation of people who were empowered by self-publishing, and so quite a lot of the stuff that I do comes from the self, and it's a very bloggy approach, and I'm obsessed by. I want to document these things because, especially now, because in a year's time we're all going to be going, God, do you remember that? That was weird.
I think it's epoch defining. I think is something I read the other day, which seems to fit it quite well, and almost there will be a before and an after time in effect for particularly in the arts. I think we're subject to huge change on the back of it. But before I move on to picking your brains about the world of classical music online, again potentially blowing your trumpet on your behalf, this is something obviously you've created on the side as a side hustle, but it has taken you to being around the world in various places as far as Azerbaijan, our random trip to Malta, was it Verbio Festival?
It was a bit random, wasn't it?
I think you emailed me about this trip to Malta International Music Festival. Was it 2 days before? 3 days before?
Yes. It was definitely. Yes, it was a very fast-moving situation, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it was. I think I flew the day after my birthday, so it's perfect for me, or something.
Right. Sorry, I've interrupted you twice now. So
no. It was just saying that it's something. It isn't just you say watching TV and then commentating on a blog that no one reads. It's something that you go around the world doing, in effect.
Yeah, and I think that I consider myself very lucky. I know lots of people say that. I know it's really nauseating. My partner says that it's not luck. It's that I've established relationships with people, and they've come to me, and I mean, it put very coldly, I have various channels in different places which help meet a need on the part of PRs and organisations who want to get their message out there. I know that sounds horrible, but I totally understand why. I don't think that I'm in any way. I look at other bloggers and other writers, and possibly some journalists, and think, I wish I'd like to have the network that you have. So I don't think that it's. I don't think that my network is as big as its image might lead people to believe. I think that I have been very lucky to form really fruitful relationships with people in order to. There are opportunities that I haven't pursued. They are invitations. And I haven't really been hamstrung by the thing that the classical music journalism world often ties itself up in knots about, which is this, well, if you've been paid to go on a trip to a festival, you can't really have an objective view about the concert that you attend. I don't really care about that. I just think, well, no, I'm really pleased to go, and it's probably going to be a good concert, so why wouldn't I write positively about it? And I do genuinely like going. I just think that actually a lot of my really important formative experiences, including some at the Maltese International Festival, have been as a result of combining travel and classical music concerts, because I just think that you get a slightly different perspective. And Armenia was fantastic. I only went to Azerbaijan for the Eurovision. Technically,
Right.
I would question the musical quality of that particular event.
Question the musical quality of Eurovision? I thought you were a die-hard fan.
I would happily question it.
Even as someone who is a huge fan of Eurovision, still there's that element of.
Oh yeah, but I find that actually musically it's so formulaic. I mean, I know that it's formulaic because it's essentially a series of montages, but after a while, once you've nailed what the different formats are for a Eurovision song, because there are a range of different formats, a range of different treatments. Once you've identified what those formats are, listening to a range of Eurovision songs is actually quite a miserable affair, I think. There's very much joy that can be derived from that, really.
Again, slight tangent off topic, but I was in Sweden when I was at sixth form, and it was their national deciding what their song for Eurovision was going to be. And the whole competition was so much bigger than us for Eurovision proper. It was colossal.
It's utterly ridiculous.
It's mad. Almost like World Cup final just for choosing their Swedish song. It was absolute madness. Well, you touched on briefly about your thoughts on seeing classical music PR being done well, and frustrations at times in various bits. Not that I'm poking you into trying to be controversial, but how are you feeling that classical music is currently doing in reacting to having to all be online and everyone just live stream constantly and that side of things?
I think that some people are doing it well. I think that some organisations have done well to take their time. I mean, still, it feels like it's been months. It's only been 2 weeks. I feel like there was a flurry of activity in the first week that will have dealt them a massive blow, and of course in that moment there is a need to. I must do something. I must be in control of the next 2 or 3 months. I totally get that. I think that there's a need for quality. I think there's a need because effectively everybody is now a content producer, and I am okay with that because I think that's great. But there is a need for quality, distinctiveness. I think there needs to be a strong thread. There needs to be a memorable pitch to the content that you're offering. For example, I'm a member, and I'm sure you probably are as well, David, that I'm a member of the Freelance Heroes chat group on Facebook, and they have a very active Twitter account run by a man called Ed Goodman. And Freelance Heroes was a really vital network for me when I started as a self-employed person. And just last night, Ed Goodman has started his bedtime business series on Twitter, which is a short 45-second video, a camera pointed at him in the corner of his lounge. All looks really cozy, and he just comes into shot. He sits down, he picks open a book about business and about self-employment, and he reads an extract, a little insight from that book, and then he closes the book and he says goodnight to you, and then he walks off. I mean, it's as simple as that. And when I see it, I just think that's adorable. Aside from the fact that it's tapping into my memory of Jackanory, it's being useful. It's Ed Goodman, who is lovely, and it's something that makes me go, actually, I want to check in with that. Similarly, Marcy Meth, an American soprano who very quickly responded with a series of I think they're bedtime lullabies. I think that's what or quarantine lullabies, and they're just basically 30 seconds of her singing with somebody, and she puts them out every day. And that's, I think this moment in time is a great marketing opportunity for a great many artists, and how you capitalize on it is going to be key. And I think that you need to hone your product.
Yeah.
That was a very long answer to a very straightforward
No, it's a very
question.
good answer. And there's one thing I'm going to pick up on there shortly as to how musicians can capitalise it and what they should be doing. But before then, do you think that we as a sector were unprepared to this transition online and we hadn't fully adopted it in the past? Potentially a leading question there.
Were they unprepared or underprepared?
Unprepared.
I don't know. I don't think they were unprepared, because the response of some organisations has been quite swift. London Mozart players, although they're not necessarily doing back-to-back live streams, London Mozart players, small, nimble, they've already got that sort of, because of the challenges that they've faced over the past 10 years, I think. I suspect they're already in that mindset of, we're not going to be beaten by this, and so they've probably responded quite quickly. Larger organisations with Arts Council funding have taken their time to surface their archive, because they've got archive, found a way of putting it out there and shaping it into some kind of digital experience as near to a concert experience as they can. And I think the LPO has done that quite well. This idea of curated playlists with a video introduction from the conductor, and cut down remote performances delivered as a YouTube premiere. That's a nice idea. So I don't think that people have been unprepared. I think they've risen to the challenge very quickly, and some of it works. Some of it will only work if the audience is prepared to stick with it, because everybody's experimenting through the people are trying different formats, and the audience has got to stick with it. The people who really, I have to say, the people who really did it well, and they'd already got the infrastructure there, I suppose, was the Berlin Phil.
With their
they saw a moment and said, "We'll give give you free access for a month." It's free access for a month. It's not free access. That's a very clear message to say, because that's already expired.
They did head that home really quick as well. It's all like, we'll give you free access with a month, and it was sort of their key messaging point over and over again was for a month.
Yeah, and in some respects, given, I think it's fair to say, it hemorrhages money, the digital concert hall. I don't think it's ever made a profit. I mean, I'm conscious that this is live. I could be saying something wrong. That from a business perspective, that's a really deft move. I don't think the infrastructure was perhaps as prepared for the amount of interest that they got, because I certainly wasn't able to get to the live stream. I just don't think they were able to support the concurrent connections that ended up being made. But when I watched the concert on catch up, it was it was a really arresting watch, because it was an orchestra who were on stage prepared for a concert, but there was nobody in the audience, and that was really, in a slightly perverse way, that was really exciting to watch. So I think weirdly, I think the Berlin Phil did it really well. But then, they had the infrastructure set up. They pour a lot of funding into it, and they've got a massive archive of content. And I also think the National Theatre has done it well as well, with live streams on YouTube.
I think the question for me was partly coming from looking at how classical music has used social media in the past, and there are some very good notable exceptions in my opinion, like the Berlin Phil and things, but other arts organisations and classical music organisations tend to use social media like a toddler who's been given a toy by their grandparents that they don't want and is being forced to play with it. And the sort of begrudging engagement that we should probably put out a tweet at some point and maybe make a visual for it, and I suppose a video interview. And that's a very potentially snarky observation from my side, but it doesn't feel like we've fully gone into fully experimenting and investing resources and information over the last few years, and as a result, we're coming to this crisis a few steps back compared to, say, football or rugby or tennis or other things.
And I imagine from a staffing point of view, and I make no, I'm flagging that I'm not about to be snarky, even if it sounds like I am. That I imagine that a lot of organisations have employed people to do digital content, and they've employed them within the context of how they perceive digital in their day-to-day business. So for some businesses, that say like Greg's, whose social media is utterly brilliant and was utterly brilliant, and that really helped turn around Greg's reputation. They clearly recognised the value of social media and digital, and they invested in that. Other organisations, like you say, sort of see digital as supporting a more traditional and PR activity, and invest accordingly. And so what I'm mindful of is that there's probably a lot of organisations for whom the digital staff are now being looked upon as, come on, what are you going to do? How are you going to help us? How are you going to transform?
Please fix everything.
So suddenly there are all these. Yeah, because we don't know what we're doing, and that's a gross oversimplification, because I'm sure that's not really how it is. But I imagine there's quite a lot of digital staff now, digital marketing staff, who are excited, really energized, or possibly under an enormous amount of pressure and probably not being paid very much money.
Very true. It's certainly tricky. Well, I did a mini exercise for myself this morning, partly to try and understand what is going to be happening going forward, so I can make informed decisions and work based on that. And it was basically to come up with a series of predictions over the next few months as to what I thought is going to happen for the classical music world.
Oh.
So to put you very much on the spot because it's live, do you have...
Oh, no!
I know, right?
No!
Do you have any predictions as to how you think it's going to go over the next few months with classical music online? I'm very aware that's a really annoying and hard question for being put on the spot.
No, not at all. No, but it's really useful. I think that those who... I can think of one musician, for example, who has thrown an enormous amount of energy into digital content, and I know that musician will carry on with that, because there is a determinant. You can just tell when that musician speaks. Notice I'm not referring to whether it's a man or a woman. When you hear that musician speak, you just think there is a determination in the way you are speaking that makes me think you are a dog with a bone. You are not going to let this go. I think some others will probably think, I'm not really getting very much return for this. I haven't got very many viewers, or I haven't got very much engagement. Why am I bothering? And so I think prediction number one is that whilst there was a massive flurry of activity, that will trail off in the coming weeks, and that will probably help, because at the moment the biggest problem for the sector in digital terms is that there is so much noise. There's nobody really curating stuff, because curation of that is, I mean, I know people put together articles and say this is happening this week, but as in there's no, that's what broadcasters traditionally did, isn't it? That's what the BBC does. They curate classical music. That's why we have the proms. And that's what festivals are for, and what concert halls are for. They curate events. So I think there will be a drop off in the amount of noise, which will mean the brands will, the stronger brands and the more recognizable brands will emerge. I think there might be 10 or maybe 15 individual performers who will who will be seen as sort of influencers, full, and they will continue with live streams. I wonder whether those artists will be people who are already signed to record labels. Don't know. I don't think there will be very many grassroots musicians who will get to that last 15. Makes it sound like a competition, doesn't it? I'm sorry.
Well, Wimbledon's gone, so we need something to get to a last.
Yeah.
Into the quarterfinals.
So I don't think it will be I don't think there'll be grassroots musicians. That sounds so brutal, but I think it will be those who have a backing or who are on the cusp of getting a backing. What else do I think about classical music? I wonder whether it will, if sufficient organisations start thinking this way, whether classical music will get its sort of education mojo back and will lead on educating a particular generation, or be seen to be leading on educating a particular generation, and that will reinforce its value. Does that make sense? Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, in terms of it's going to have to be creative and innovative. And in my opinion, classical music has been not in a position where it has had to be creative and innovative. In times it has been, but it's not been forced to, or there's not been the necessity behind doing it, whereas now there is. So potentially that may instill the education side in new ways. And obviously it's a great way to connect to new audiences and new individuals, particularly who are younger. And we've all seen that streaming is one of the fastest growing genres or classical music is one of the fastest growing genres on streaming. So technically there should be this appetite and audience there. It's just working out this connection between the two. And I think actually my prediction would be that some of the grassroots people may come through. So one example I always use is Esther Abrami, who's an amazing violinist, and while she was a student at Royal College decided to work on her profile online. And as a result, she now goes around the world as a soloist, but also as a digital content creator, an ambassador. She was presenting some of the Sony content in Europe over summer and does some wonderful things. So I think having that flexibility and nimbleness as a grassroots person may help with that potentially.
Shortly before you and I spoke, I was talking to Jess Gillam, and in any other conversation that would be a massive name drop, but because it's this, apparently that's okay for me to say. And what really struck me during my conversation with her is actually how mature she sounds, given how mature her thinking is, given the age that she is, and also how she occupies this quite special place where she is truly inspiring other musicians who are only 2 or 3 years younger than her, and sort of galvanizing them. And she is absolutely a galvanizer. She is powering the Virtual Scratch Orchestra, which she's currently engaged in. And I wonder to what extent whether this period of time will galvanize a whole other that next generation of musicians. I know this might seem a little bit ridiculous given that it's such a short space of time, but it's such a shock to the system, and it's such a shock to everybody, that it's potentially going to have a positive impact on a great many musicians, such that they too start combining their musicianship with digital know-how to produce something which is long-lasting, of the time, and they will start building their own networks too. It's too early to say that, but I wonder whether there's something around that.
Certainly. Well, that brings me on very nicely to my final thing to ask from you, and that's
planned. You've actually planned this. You have a running.
Oh yeah, it's I want to say running order. It's vague at best.
Right.
It's,
okay. Is it written down though? I mean, you're looking down at your desk, which makes out you've got it written down.
It's almost on the back of a fag packet. Without smoking, but it's
right.
just general little piece of paper.
Oh, you have,
yes.
Right.
So there is some vague structure. You wouldn't think it from listening, but there is some vague structure.
No, I think you do yourself down, please.
So, as you were saying about people coming around and having their own ideas and creating digital content to galvanise a new generation, What advice do you have as someone who's been making content for years and also evaluating other people's content as a commentator as to what they could be doing?
Oh dear.
Potentially get you in trouble.
That was that last. You had me right up until that last phrase.
What advice could you give for people making
I can
content?
answer that. I can answer that with something that I saw yesterday that I very nearly messaged you about. Ooh. Because I just thought I can't believe they've done that. And I'm not going to name them because that would be professionally unsound of me. But I think we judge things visually first, and because digital is a visual medium, it is a visual medium. I realise that we distribute audio on here as well, but it is a visual medium. Whatever people do, it has to convey their key message immediately. And conveying your key message, I think, is done in a Twitter handle or in a biog or in a tweet, and or in a piece of design, or how a web page looks, or how a video looks. And I appreciate that we're all making videos from our front room. I get that, or in this case from our offices. So to a certain extent, it's more challenging to be distinctive, but people are going to have to be distinctive, and they've got to convey that within the first 10 seconds. And being distinctive might be in terms of personality, presentation, colours, design, words. Do you see what I mean? I think there is a greater need now to make sure that whatever it is that you are doing is punchy, so that you get the cut through. I think that just putting a website together, and I'm really sorry, just putting a website together and going, oh, that's all right, I'll pick that template, that's fine. Unless the product that you're selling is really, really needed, it's filling, it's meeting a need that nobody else realised they had, then you will need to make sure that how that message is delivered is really, really punchy. That's my advice.
Very good advice too. So I think that's actually a fantastic note to end on. So if anyone wants to find out more about Thoroughly Good or see your random tweets and things, where can they find you on the internet and places?
How dare you? You can find, search Thoroughly Good on Twitter. You can search Thoroughly Good Classical Music Podcast on Spotify and all good podcast apps. And you can find the blog at blog.thoroughlygood.me.
Brilliant. And who's on the next podcast as well?
Well, you obviously, because we have recorded one now. It's an awkward moment.
Great tie-in.
Wow, hey, that's really good, David.
That wasn't on the piece of paper.
Yeah. Wow, that was effortless. That was. There's one with Jess Gillam, who's music. So I've asked musicians with music choices of music they're listening to that has supported them at this moment in time, and most, if not all, of the music choices have been really good. Jess's.
Good.
Really, really highly emotional choices, and I can't listen to them without crying. And I'm not entirely sure whether she understood what the brief was. So that one's probably next. And one with a horn player from the Shanghai Symphony Orchestra, who is obviously living in Shanghai, who quite interestingly has escaped any kind of lockdown anywhere in the world, because he was moving around the world. So he holidayed in the US around about the time that Shanghai was locked down, and then he left the US just as New York was being shut down. He's returned to Shanghai, and the restrictions have been lifted. So he really sort of avoided all of this. That was a fascinating conversation. There we are.
Incredible. Well, lots to look forward to.
I don't normally sell my own podcast in this way. I just hope that I just normally spit it out on Twitter and hope that people listen.
Yeah. Is it quite unusual being on the other side of an interview? Because I guess you do so many interviewing of other people. It must be.
It is a bit weird, yes, because you respond to something, and you get about 3/4 of the way through the response, and you think, "Oh my God, I've been going on for ages." Yeah, so it is a bit.
Yeah, well, you've done great at being a guest. So that's fantastic.
Well, thank you very much. Very
Pleasure.
kind of you to say.
Well, if you've been watching along, thank you very much for watching the live streams, and also please do go check Jon out. And thank you again for listening back on the podcast here as well. I'll be back on Monday with a freelance violist called Heather Hawkin, who's not only been really interesting at her career of being a freelancer, but also documenting her tips and advice via YouTube and vlogs. So that should be quite an interesting conversation as to how she's doing at the moment. And yeah, I haven't quite worked out a sign-off, Jon. You'll be very disappointed at the lack of professionalism. So it's just going to fade out, I think.
It's all right.
Yeah,
Just go. Just go.
Perfect.
My phone has been going
Cool.
mad.
In that case, we'll go. Bye-bye.
All right, bye.